Let me go ahead and start by saying that our roundtable session is titled Cultural Sustainability in the Craft Economy. Again, my name is Lesli Robertson, and I'm going to be moderating a presentation and discussion with panelists from the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. We have Halle Butvin, if you want to wave, or we can. Diana and Jai, did I pronounce that right? I did, good. And Ashkhen Khudaverdyan. And Ashkhen is actually joining us from Armenia. And I wanted just to take a moment, Ashkhen, to say that we thank you for being a part of this panel and bringing a much needed voice to this very important region. And that personally, we're all really thinking about you and the artisans who we've worked with that are now affected by the current war. So I just wanted to say thank you. We know it has been hard to
thank you very much. Thank you all.
So, I will not be reading any abstracts or bios, but I encourage you all to get on this wonderful app that we're using. And just kind of read the bios from each of these amazing women and to get a little bit more sense, if you haven't already, of what our panel is about. I also encourage you, as we go along in this session, to use the Q&A to start sending questions in, because we're going to be hearing from each of the panelists, but then we're hopefully we'll have about 20 to 30 minutes at the end to have a proper roundtable discussion about questions that you're posing. So I will be monitoring those throughout and hopefully getting to all of your questions. And again, I encourage you that if there is a specific panelist that you do want to ask the question to, make sure that their name is included in that. So I will not take up any more of the time because we have so much things to get to. And I do want to say thank you again for joining us. And I will turn this over now to Halle Butvin for her to start us out. And then we'll all just sort of take our videos off, the rest of us, and let you go.
Hello, everyone. As Lesli said, my name is Halle Butvin. I was hoping Lesli was going to give me a bio, but I'll do it because I think it's a little bit important. I'm going to be setting some context today on some reflections about working on cultural sustainability and the craft economy and how we can be better in our roles as we interact with makers around the world. I'm Director of Special Projects at the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. And today I am involved I run a program on cultural sustainability. And in that program, we focus on language revitalization, on indigenous media development, and also on cultural heritage industries. And working with makers all over the world is a really core part of that. And Ashkhen and Diana and I all work together on some of those programs that you'll be hearing a little bit more about in their presentations. The idea behind our cultural sustainability program is that we wanted, the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage represents intangible cultural heritage. We're not a museum, but each year we do the annual Smithsonian Folklife Festival on the National Mall, which many of you may be aware of. Now we've done a virtual festival this past year. But the idea behind the center is really that we work with communities in presenting their heritage. And the Cultural Sustainability Program is relatively new to the center. And its focus is to work with communities and to be able to respond to their needs. So, communities that we work with come to us and say, the youth in our community are not picking up our language, or they are not continuing to practice the craft, and we're not sure what to do about it. And so we work with local partners all over the world and try and figure out what solutions they're trying to bring and how to support that, and then how to share that information back out with other communities who might be struggling with the same challenges. And so in that program, in that context, the background that I'm bringing personally as someone who has worked with makers over my career, I grew up with a mom who had an antique store and she did a lot of folk craft and painting. And as I grew up and kind of experienced that world in my career, I had started a fair trade business in Uganda that I ran for a number of years. And I kind of served as this external Westerner designer with this wonderful group of Ugandan ladies. And we were working with a lot of kitenge fabrics, and we were making the products and selling them exclusively in the US market. And I learned a lot about the volatility of the market and the challenges that you face when you're trying to deal with taking a product from a place and selling it in an external market that doesn't really necessarily understand it. So some of those themes are going to come up, but one of the challenges I faced in my own business was that, African fabric the kitenge became very stylish and very trendy, and our sales went through the roof. And then when the market went on to something else, they came back down. And so we felt really tied to these global trends, and realized that that volatility was really scary, and it was really shaky, and it was really hard to create a sustainable business based on those concepts. But I was very focused on it from an economic perspective, and I had been working a lot in international development through there. And so in working with the Smithsonian, I've completely taken on and learned a tremendous amount. It's been a huge learning curve being at the Smithsonian, but looking at not just at the sales piece of this and the possibility for livelihoods, but looking at cultural heritage and the meaning of cultural heritage. So I want to step back for 1 second. One thing that I normally start out with, but I wanted to make sure to introduce myself and give you a little bit of context of where I'm coming from. I'm also working from home like everyone else these days. Our office is normally in DC, and during the pandemic, I have actually moved out to rural Virginia. And so I just want to acknowledge with respect the Rappahannock people on whose traditional territory I live and whose relationship with the land continues today. And I'm grateful to have my home here in these beautiful Shenandoah Mountains in the Piedmont. So as I mentioned, thinking about artisans as both producers and stewards of material culture is really core to the approach of our work at the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. This is Armenian Pokosyan. She's a needlework artisan from Armenia. And what she says about her lace is that with very few materials, you can tell a whole story. And so one of the things that we've been thinking about in terms of our work with artisans and measuring our work with artisans is markers of success and understanding what's key to a successful collaboration. So in our work, and really in the context, we've seen around the world that there have been rapid changes that have taken place. And for any of you, whether you're somewhere across the world or whether it's in Ashkhen in Armenia, we've dealt with this a lot. But the context seems to be the same, that a lot of these challenges that are brought on by globalization and urbanization, they've really challenged artisans and in many cases isolated them. A lot of young people move to cities for economic opportunity. There's often a pressure to assimilate. We've worked with ethnic Tibetan artisans in China, and that's a major challenge for them there in continuing their cultural practices, not just the craft piece of it, but the whole of cultural practice. And as people move into cities, they also have access to global products and much cheaper products that don't kind of have that cultural tie that the other products would have had. I want to make a note that throughout the presentation, there are images in the background that are from the different communities that we work with. So if anyone has a specific question about something, I can answer later. But this photo right here is of a bootmaker, a Tibetan bootmaker in Repgong in China, making traditional Tibetan boots. So with these changes in mind, it's still true that craft is the second largest employer in the developing world and behind agriculture. And this is particularly true in Asia. In India, the creative economy employs an estimated 45 to 48% of the workforce. And the creative economy in the Asian region more broadly, which includes design, fashion, film, crafts, and other creative goods, accounts for nearly $228 billion in exports. This was a 2015 figure, but that's almost double that of Europe. And so craft is not a small thing. It's a really important thing for economic livelihood. But at the same time, even though that it has this huge economic value, there are also these challenges that I mentioned. Local customers are looking for cheaper goods, and they have alternatives now that they didn't necessarily have in the past. And so a lot of times artisans have a difficulty, even if they're still continuing to practice a craft, they have difficulty finding sales channels for the products. They find that their local customers that would have purchased their products are turning to cheaper foreign-made alternatives, and that there's also a growing prestige in some cases for foreign-made goods. And so enter my own intervention into this space and into working internationally with artisans is the development project. And so you have folks like USAID and the World Bank is increasingly getting into this space, and others looking at cultural heritage, wanting to support women particularly. A lot of artisan support programs have come in through gender in these development projects, and economic growth. And with the focus on economic growth, you're often looking at a market-driven approach. But then that begs the question of which market are we looking at? And what we've seen kind of across the board in the international space is when you have folks from the US or Europe, we work also with British Council's Crafting Futures program as another example of this in the UK, and the EU's Creative Europe. You're having these exchanges and these interactions where you're bringing designers and makers from these Western countries into other countries around the world and working as consultants. And I've been in these shoes. I worked in Pakistan doing the same kind of a project where the focus was on the export market. And there's this desire a desire from the artisans to access the global market. There's an excitement for it, but there's also a tendency for consultants for us to kind of focus on the markets that we know as designers or as makers. A lot of times this has translated into looking at, for example, trade shows. New York Now is a big one that's been a real focus for global handmade products. Also US retailers that have a focus on handmade goods like West Elm or high-end boutique luxury goods or different special collections. But keeping that in mind, if we look at the global market, what does the global market demand? Customers want handmade techniques and details, but then there's also a demand for affordable price. And when we're working with artisans, what that sometimes translates into is an approach where we change the color, or we look at a particular technique or motif, and we try and adopt that, simplify it to get a lower price so the product is more accessible, and try to create a more globalized product that's attractive to an international audience. When this happens, the traditional craft can be decontextualized through design. So when we have these opportunities, it's also exchange. Short-term design innovation support can be really exciting. It can feel innovative. But designers often work with artisans and innovate based on their own cultural context and aesthetic, the colors that they prefer. We had an aha moment. We have a program in Bhutan where a consultant that works with our program is a textile expert. He's from Singapore. He had gone to Bhutan 10 years ago, and he had done product development workshops with the weavers there. And 10 years later, we brought him back working on a program with the Smithsonian. He had been working with the UN when he was there before. And we went into a shop, and what he saw everywhere were the scarves that he had designed during that consultancy. And it was the exact same product through the shop. And when we were asking shop owners about the scarves, they said, oh yeah, visitors from abroad are coming and buying these. No one locally wears these things, but the international visitors love to snap them up. But the reality is it had been 10 years and they were just making that product. And then that was it. There was a focus towards making that greatly simplified product simply for these international customers. And we then had a conversation of what does this mean? What was the purpose? Because he thought he was doing something more impactful than that and something that would have a more of an impact locally that did not. And so when products are designed this way, sometimes they can enjoy a brief spotlight in the global marketplace, but then the trends move on. And what we've seen, there are different models and ways that this works. So typically artisans will be identified in a particular place. A foreign consultant comes in and teaches trainings on product development, design, marketing. We help artisans to develop a new collection, but that collection is then influenced by the foreign designer's aesthetic and skills. So there are a couple different scenarios that can happen here. In the best case, the designer themselves forges a long-lasting, equitable relationship with artisans and assists with representing the new products in the market. But in other cases, sometimes what can happen is the designer assists the artisans to create an affordable, globally in-demand product, and where there's a desire by international markets. And the artisans may receive significant orders and scale up to fill, and then the market moves on. That's something I experienced in my own business that was devastating and was really hard to come back from. And the other place where this happens is then a lot of times artisans then can earn a livelihood, but then the craft practice itself is reduced to labor or commodity production. And so that has really, in thinking through this work at the Smithsonian, the question that we've been asking ourselves is then, what does craft mean for the communities when it's severed from its cultural context? If our goal is to support livelihoods and access to markets, then what does that mean if artisans are just making these products so that they can churn them out, so that they can head west, and there isn't this appreciation in the local community for these products anymore? It just becomes another form of capitalist labor. And so our challenge is this. We want to go back to that concept I presented earlier, that artisans are both producers and stewards of material culture, and center that. And what that centering does is attempts to really change the dynamic. And through our work, what we're really working towards is cultivating local designer makers. And so instead of thinking about bringing international people in all the time, thinking about what our role can be if we're coming in internationally, towards working with who's there, with the artisans and the designers that are there, towards this kind of role. And what we've seen in some of our projects where there's been a lot of success is this person that's a local designer and maker. So where they understand the cultural and historical context and significance of the craft and the craft practice, where that individual is grounded in the craft practice themselves. They themselves are a practitioner, a weaver. They have, making the jewelry, silversmith, but where they also have the ability and access to skills and tools that are required to innovate on the practice. So how can we do better? What is our role in these dynamics, and how can we help cultivate local designer makers? One piece of it is to take a holistic look at the craft practice. So for us to really understand, when you're going to a new place, what is the cultural context for the craft practice? In our projects, we've connected with local researchers and attempted to understand, what is the significance? Is the practice declining, and why? And are there individuals within the local community that are championing cultural heritage, and how can we support them? Are there organizations that are working on presenting, preserving, or sustaining cultural heritage? And how can we actually support those organizations to do better work? And what are their needs? What are their goals? And how might we support them? We also try to analyze local market potential. And that's been a big learning, surveying local attitudes and recognizing that the local markets and focusing on local markets, and Ashkhen will talk about this in Armenia, can be transformational and is so much more. And we're seeing that now with COVID more than ever, is that when those borders close and travel isn't possible anymore, you're within your own community in your own region. And so figuring out how to strengthen those relationships within the community is essential, and will continue to be even more essential moving forward in the world, but we're really seeing the impacts of that today. Also looking within the community on what design means in the cultural context and who is practicing design, and trying to really assess and suss out, are there connections that we can make as outsiders coming in between local designers and artisans? We try to view craft as an ecosystem. And we also try to look at design not only from the lens of products, but in fostering connections across creative and cultural industries. So this means connecting artisans not only with designers, but with artists, filmmakers, illustrators, and graphic designers. And again, you'll see some examples of this in both in Ashkhen and Diana's work. A part of this is also building appreciation within the local creative industries for traditional craft and practice. We also do our best to take an intergenerational approach. So really looking at how craft is learned and passed on from one generation to the next, and figuring out how we can take intergenerational learning and put it into our programs and our trainings that we're doing. At the end of the day, the value of the outsider gaze, really, it does matter. At its core, that's what the Folklife Festival is all about. You're coming to the National Mall in Washington, you're presenting your craft to a lot of people who are, they're outsiders. They have no idea, for the most part. They're coming and they're learning about your culture and your practice. Tourism does that too, and it's extremely valuable. And that idea of appreciation from someone else really can build confidence and can build, we've seen that actually, and translating from doing the Armenia Folklife Festival program and seeing how some of those artisans then saw their work in a new light and saw the responsibility of what they were doing beyond just making this particular craft, but also seeing that they are part of a lineage and part of really continuing Armenia's cultural heritage. But what's really important is that it's a bigger ecosystem. And so that outsider gaze is important, but it doesn't necessarily need to translate into a connection to that outsider's market. And so that's where I would urge all of us when we're thinking about this work to really focus on local markets and local economies and figure out and turn to local partners to really look at what the needs are and what they're trying to do and what challenges they have, and how can we get creative towards kind of really cultivating the ecosystem for craft in the particular community, and focusing those resources in that way as well. So if you are invited to participate in a project, or you're an organization that is, has an opportunity to do an exchange and to work with makers in another place, what we've seen as the greatest value that you can bring to the table is in sharing your own experience as a maker or a small business owner, appreciating the craft practice in context. So that means like really learning about the cultural heritage and what the craft means within the whole. And then focusing really on exchanging skills and technique and looking at the elements of an equitable exchange and how to create that. And so in summary, we're really seeing this as a shift in the way that we work. And, I've been working on this for my whole career, but in the last 6-7 years at Smithsonian, and we really pivoted. We started the approach looking at connections to international markets. And to a certain extent, we still are doing some international market connection. But instead, we're really starting first within the communities and looking at the meaning of the craft within the community and how we can really kind of till the soil of that ecosystem and how we can work with our local partners in country, figuring out what the needs are and how to really cultivate healthy and vital cultural practices and doing that through exchange. And I just wanted to share with you one of my favorite photos. And given this is from our project in Tibet, it's a Tonka painter that we worked with. And I love his jacket that says "Life is full of drama." And isn't that the truth? So I want to thank everyone. And I look forward to Ashkhen and Diana's presentations and answering any questions that you all might have. Thank you.
Perfect. Halle, thank you so much. That was wonderful. I will say, if we have some time at the end, we did have someone asking if you can make some quick comments about background photos. So, maybe if we have some time at the end, we could just kind of run through and you can give us a little.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, I think it would be great. So we're going to go on and say hello to Ashkhen and invite her to share about her work in Armenia with local artisans.
Thank you, and hello again, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here at the great platform of Textile Society of America to represent our project and our country of Armenia. So as Halle mentioned several times, the Smithsonian Institution has this great project called My Armenian Cultural Heritage Program, which started in 2015. And the whole concept is preserving our cultural heritage through cultural tourism development. But I'll go more into details of the project after introducing what Armenia is. So as an Armenian, sometimes I see that people abroad don't know where Armenia is, what is Armenia, and why is Armenia. So I'll go over some interesting facts about our country and show you some photos from our country, and we'll be happy to answer some questions later. So just our called Armenia. We have our own alphabet and language, and you can see our country's name on your screen called Hayastan. And the other fact is our country is the first country to accept Christianity as the first religion, a state religion. And our capital, Yerevan, is one of the oldest cities in the world. It's older than Rome. And actually it's 2,800 years old. And this is this picture shows one of our mountainous duties because our country is situated in the Caucasus region. And why Smithsonian chose Armenia or why USAID chose Armenia to implement their project here? Because Armenia is home to very rich art and craft traditions. Our traditions extend to many thousand years, and we have textile art, which include a lot of embroidery, carpet making, rug making, knitting, and crochet, and all of these traditions serve as a mean of resilience. And we have great practice in iron and clay, in jewelry making, silver and goldsmithing. We have great practice in wood carving, and the most iconic one maybe that is related to Armenia is stone carving, otherwise called hachkar making. We call them hachkars, which we translate like crossbones, and we carve crosses on the stone, which are very beautiful. And because Armenia is also home to authentic songs and festivals, and festive dances also. You can come to Armenia and wear our national costumes and sing our songs and learn Armenian dances. And this is another intangible cultural heritage that Smithsonian works with. We are a country that is home to the first winery and delicious wines. In 2011, the archaeologists found in Armenia cave the first winery that is known to the world, which is dating back to 6,000 years before Christ. So, and starting in 2010, and after that, in Armenia, the wine tasting one culture was reborn. Also in the same cave, the archaeologists found the first shoes that people know of. So this is also an interesting fact for the textile society. Armenia is also home to the delicious food, bread, and fruits and vegetables. One of my colleagues once told me that we have spoiled apricot sourcing because after coming to Armenia and tasting delicious apricots that we had, he could never taste any other apricot. Armenia is also home to a lot of ancient artifacts, ancient sites, and natural wonders. You can see in the picture the great Ustasas, where you can find ancient petroglyphs on the rock. And we have the Karahuns, which is the brother of the Stonehenge. And that these are like limited amount of reasons why Smithsonian decided to do this project in Armenia. As you can see, there are a lot of cultural heritage which the Smithsonian and USAID. Tourism, unlike the great facts that I mentioned, the tourism in Armenia was mainly concentrated on churches. People like to mention the fact that we have a lot of churches and we are the first nation to accept Christianity. I wanted to show the tourists and show the world that there is more to Armenia rather than going from church to church. The Smithsonian and the USAID did the My Armenia project. In 2015, the launch event was held. And the main goal for the project is to strengthen the cultural heritage tourism offerings, raise the awareness about Armenia from the cultural heritage perspective, improve cultural sector work skills, and coordinate partnership in cultural heritage tourism sector. Our program also concentrates concentrated efforts in 5 regions of Armenia, which were the furthest ones from the Yerevan, from capital city, because a lot of tourists that came into the country decided went to the adjacent or near regions and didn't explore the furthest regions. We wanted to show them also the beautiful sites and beautiful offerings that the further regions had. And also, we a lot of sectors needed to be included in the cultural heritage tourism, like festivals, museums, and artisans, of course. We decided that each component would have its own pace of development. Because, for example, museums are institutions that are in some level of development, compared to artisans that have different needs and are in different level of development. So Halle and I were responsible for the artisan component of the program. And as my background is on the economic side and economic development, I'm more of a business person. Halle was the person that taught me also how to work with the artisans and how to run this kind of project. So in a sense, this is application of the approach that Halle told you about. And in applying this method to our project, we started the Artisan Initiative. The Artisan Initiative started in 2016, and we started with space meetings, not doing something out of logic, but going and meeting these people in person. Then we did training sessions. We did 6 months of design mentorship and connected people to the market. This cycle, I will talk later, is maybe the perfect cycle for doing this kind of project. So we started with personal meetings with artisans. Me and Halle went to each and every workshop and met with every one of them and did interviews. As Halle said, we drank a lot of coffee during this meeting and did need assessment. And based on this need assessment, we had personal profiles of each artisan and their needs. After that, we started the training session. We did group trainings on marketing, design, costing, which were like kick-off trainings, and to bring all of these artisans to one page and for them to meet each other, to meet us, and also to be on the same page with us. After the training, based on the individual needs, we did design mentorship. As Halle mentioned, the best approach is to bring international designers to Armenia, but also to work with local ones. We had a local partner called Pennies Cultural Center, who are concentrated on cultural heritage and doing revival of the cultural heritage in a modern sense. So Lesli in the picture had come to Armenia 2 years, I think, before this, and she was one of our designer trainers who worked with our women artisans on textile and knitting. But also we try to build the capacity of our partner designers here. And this is also playing on the sustainable part of the project. Whenever the project ends, our artisans will be able to continue the design work with the local partners. After the 6 months, after the product design mentorship, we also showed them how to turn their artisan practices into businesses. Usually the artisans and art people in Armenia have this mindset of that art and craft should not be turned into business, and it should be just looked at and and somehow they think, I think it's the Soviet time thinking that the artist should be poor, and but we also worked on changing the mindset that their art or craft can be turned into business and marketed it. So we did marketing development and business development, but we did not only talked about it, but also showed how to do it. And we developed a lot of marketing material for them. As you can see, we did like banners, postcards, we did a separate lookbook for all the artisans. And I can show you, we have like several postcards that I have here that has their stories and photos. And we did digital materials for them, printed materials for them, photos, videos, and all of this in combination showed them how everything can be marketed and can be told. As we mentioned, everything is based in the project is based on the research, and I forgot to mention that we partnered with the local Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography. So every single step was referred to the research that they did for us towards the region. Because as Halle mentioned, the artisan represents the place they have to live. Their stories are also told in some places they live and they create. So here I would ask Lesli to show us a video that we developed of a wonderful woman, Sona, who lives in mountain village, Achik, and she's a carpet maker. She tells her story how she's carpet making and how she's transferring the tradition. I somehow thought, like, out of this old video, Sona, it helps maybe the whole story that the project has done or the result of the project on her. Lesli, can you please play it?
Ամուսինս ես գյուղից է, ճանաչել ենք իրար, հետո որ ես ամուսնացել եմ եկել եմ այստեղ ինձ հետաքրքրեց մի հատ գորգ, որը կիսած էր, հենց այդ ամեն ինչը սկսվել է այդ գորգից, ու ես միշտ հետաքրքրվել եմ նախշերը ինչա նշանակում, որ թվականի է, թվագրությունը, քանի գյոլ է եղել այդ գորգը, տենց, ու հետո 2001 թվականին երեխեքին աշակերտներին սովորեցրել եմ գորգ գործել։ Գորգ գործելուց հետո ինձ ձգեց կարպետը։ Կարպետը մի ուրիշ աշխարհ է, կարպետի մեջ ես շատ խորացա, էլի երեխեքին սովորեցրեցի, ու ես հորդորել եմ, որ ամեն մեկը 10 հոգու սովորեցնի։ Հիմա շատ ուրախ եմ, որ ինտերնետով նայում եմ, տեսնում եմ արդեն Երևանում դպրոցներ կան, ստուդիաներ կան, թանգարաններն են կանչում սովորեցնում։ Թանգարաններ ստեղծվել է 60 տարի առաջ։ 2000-3000-ի կարգի նմուշներ ունենք, շատ թանկ նմուշներ ունենք։ Ճիշտ է, ստեղծում ենք, հորինում ենք, բայց հələ չենք հասցրել այն նախշերը եւ այն գործվածքի տեսակները ստեղծենք, որ ստեղ կա։ Այս թանգարանը մեր համար մի ծով աղբյուր է, մի ես չգիտեմ ինչ, անհատակ հետաքրքիր տեղ է, որտեղ որ կարաս ամեն օր մի նոր բան տեսնես։ Ես աշխատում եմ դպրոցում եւ դպրոցում էլի երեխեքին սովորեցնում եմ, աշակերտները գալիս են, այստեղ հետաքրքիր է իրանց, ասում են, որ ինչա նշանակում։ Մենք հետագա նպատակներ ունենք, ուզում ենք այս ամեն ինչը մենակ մենք չտեսնենք, դրսից էլ հյուրեր գան տեսնեն եւ գալիս են, արդեն ես մաստեր կլասներ եմ անում, մի քանի տեսակի։ Ունենք ասույթներ, պատմվածքներ ունենք պահած, թանգարանում մենք ունենք ինչպես են թաղումներն արել, ինչպես են հարսանիքներն արել, որ ճաշը ինչ ձևով են եփում, ինչի մեջ են եփում, ինչ կանաչիներ են գցում, հագուստներ ունենք, տուրիստներ գալիս են մեկ-մեկ, հագնում են հագուստները, նկարվում են, սովետական շրջանի իրեր ունենք։ Մամաս խալի է գործել։ Երբ որ 10-րդ դասարան ավարտում էի, ինքը էլի խալի էր գործում։ Այդ ես մեջն եմ եղել։ Այդտենց էլ ուզում էի, որ այդ ավանդույթը պահպանվի։ Չգիտեմ, սիրել եմ, ուզեցել եմ, որ երեխեքը իմանան։ որ հետո մեծանան, փոխանցեն ուրիշներին։ Եվ փառք Աստծո, որ Հայաստանում ծաղկում է այդ ամեն ինչը։ Եթե դու քո ազգայինը չգիտես, դժվար է։ Օթում ես դու։ Ու այդ ազգայինն էլ այնքան շատ խորն է, որ ինչքան հետ ես գնում, այնքան շատ հետ ես գնում։ Ինձ զանգում են հիմա, զանգում են ու ասում են, հարցեր են տալի, ինչպես ներկենք, ինչ ձևով, քանի տեսակի կարպետ եւ այլն, մարդիկ, որոնք չեմ ճանաչում։ Ես սիրով եմ անում, սրտանց, հանգստանում ես, ամենազբաղված ժամանակ, երբ որ շատ հոգնում ես, ձեռքդ ես վերցնում ու լավ ես զգում քեզ։
So to continue our presentation, this shows what work we did with the artisans. We showed them how to present them in the market, what little stories, little traditions or their behavior can be very interesting to the tourists or to even the locals. In order to convince these artisans, because when working individually with each artisan, we sometimes got a feedback that why are we doing this? Why do you make us make these things? Or why do you insist on telling our stories? We finally came to the final idea that we need to present these artisans to the markets. And the first thing that we did was the My Handmade Armenia festival. We held it in Cascade, in Lesli's favorite place in Armenia. And this became an annual thing. And every year at the end of September, we are doing this My Handmade Armenia festival. How, well, except this year because it was because of the COVID, but how this festival is different from the others. This festival is different because it's not only sales, it doesn't only include like showing the products and selling it, but it also includes showcasing and teaching. We wanted also to educate the customers in the market. We wanted the locals even to learn about the traditions that Armenia can offer and to appreciate the handmade. Sometimes even I was not appreciating the handmade as much as I did after working with the artisans. Because when you see how a small piece of yarn, piece of clay or a sand can become a useful, functional product, then you appreciate the made product more, and then you can see the energy that the artisan put into the product and you are carrying it forward. So during this festival, we did presentations and demonstrations, but the second year we also, inspired by the Folk Life Festival, we also did workshop classes for adults and kids. Another market opportunity was the Folk Life Festival. As Halle mentioned, a lot of artisans saw their craft and their tradition from a different perspective. Another opportunity was after the Folk Life, the Center for Folk Life and Cultural Heritage collaborated with Novica online market, and we are presenting 3 artisans now on the Novica website to sell internationally. And a lot of embassies are now working with us to present Armenian craft in the international fairs. A lot of local buyers, we had like local buyer meeting and introduced them to the new artisans, to regional artisans, to new products, to new functional products that we worked with the artisans to make. So how we worked towards preserving the traditions and how we worked towards cultural sustainability. One of the problems that Halle mentioned was that a lot of international designers or even the local designers come and make the artisans do something or finish a product collection that is there for 10 years and is not innovative at all and does not prosper later. But our approach here was different because we first of all had local and partners that contributed to the work vastly. We had Armenian designers also working with the artisans alongside with the international designers. And we did like a perfect mix of international market need and local traditional designs that gave us the final result of products that are functional, that are modern, but also carry the history and the traditions of Armenians. For example, in the pictures, you can see that one of our artisans that used to make batik scarves is now designing local ornaments, which she took from the one of the churches, which is well known in the area, Noravang. And she incorporated these ornaments on her scarves. Another great part of our collaboration was that everything was based on our ethnographic research and everything was referred to that research. All the designs, all the marketing, the postcards, the cards, the storytelling, the videos and photos, everything was referred to the research because research was done on the local level and everything told was about the village, the community, the region, because every region is different in Armenia. And also artisans were given a freedom to choose if they want to do a design that the designer suggested or they wanted to do the design that they want to do themselves. And of course, we did individual approach to each need of the artisan because sometimes they needed, we could give them a great idea to make, but they didn't have the raw material, they didn't have the paint, they didn't have the textile or anything. And sometimes the international designers come in, just give the design and sketch, but they don't think about the material, whether we have it here or no. So our approach was individual based on the materials that are available in Armenia. So 2 success stories that I wanted to mention to you, how the artisan growth was noticeable to us throughout these 4 years. First success story about Arevik Babayan. She is a lace maker, and when we first met her, she only made this beautiful laces in a round form. And the first time she participated in the My Handmade Armenia, she only sold these laces in this form. And then after the training or the workshop session that we did with Lesli and our local partners, she came up with the idea of making earrings with these laces. And she started in the second picture, you can see how she did her first earrings. And later she was so inspired that she started to play with different materials, and now she's incorporating her laces into the metal and jewelry. Another one is that textile making group in Goris Women's Center. They are doing woolen products. First, they were doing only natural colors, and you can see in the first picture. And after the trainings, when Lesli told them how to do natural dyes and how to dye the yarns and threads into natural colors, they started making products that are now colorful. And this does not distort the Armenian or the traditional ornaments or colors or anything. So the successful combination of work is, we can say that we had a supportive and visionary leadership under Halle's great experience, and sharing that experience first of all with me and then with our local partners, with which we transferred to the artisans. Then we had a repeated opportunity to build the relationship with the artisans. We did not, after working with these artisans, we did not leave them on the halfway. We worked with them till the end, and currently we are still working with them, and we'll support them as much as we can. And the first cycle of our work showed that we can do this, as I said, this perfect cycle of working with artisans to bring them to the market effectively. And then we did strong partnership with local committed designers groups. And of course, we respected the traditions and did the contemporary products with incorporation of our traditional vibe. So this is this much about my Armenia program. I hope you liked it, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you have later when we have the Q&A session. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, Ashkhen. This was great. Also, just as a note, there's some great things going back and forth in the chat in terms of some links that were shared by Halle and Ashkhen. So if you all want to make sure you grab those before the session ends, to do that. Thank you again, Ashkhen. I'm glad the video worked and we were able to clear up your audio. So thank you to the audience member that suggested to pull out that mic. Let me go ahead and introduce Diana and Jai. Really excited to have your presentation, Diana. I know that you just came off of a really great conference, and so this is a very wonderful sharing that you're going to do about that. And again, if you want to just do a quick bio, that would be great. And again, let me say before you start, I do see y'all's messages about the chat, so we'll try to work on that during the Q&A session. And again, keep posing your questions, and we're excited to have Diana. So if you also need me to do the video, just let me know, okay? We'll work on this as we go.
Okay, thank you so much, Leslie, and it's a pleasure to be here with Ashkhen, with Halle, with you, with other textile enthusiasts. And in way of a bio to start, first of all, I want to acknowledge that the place where I live and work is on the traditional land of the Piscataway people, and that African Americans who built a lot of the nation are also responsible for building many things on the land on which we work at the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. So I've been a cultural specialist and curator, folklife curator, for 30 plus years at the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. I've worked mostly globally and locally. Globally in Africa and the diaspora. I started out working in Senegal, and I still work in Senegal. I've also worked in Niger, South Africa, Bermuda, the Bahamas, Haiti, and a lot of the work has involved textiles. But I started out, and still am, an artist who works primarily in textiles. And I wanted to mention this because it'll have relevance later to what we're talking about. My mother had a dry cleaning store in Brooklyn, and I was the repair lady or the repair girl at the time growing up as a high schooler. I'd learned to sew at the age of 8 in Bermuda, and so it was a very logical thing, and I was always interested in textiles. So I also, we had a little boutique in the front of the store called Afro-Caribbean Boutique, where I sold one-off clothing. And then as a teenager, I had the great honor of training through Zelda Wynn Valdez, who was one of the first couturiers in New York City of African descent. And she had a practice. She did the first Playboy bunny outfit. She also did Mae West's first sequins gown, and she did Eartha Kitt's wardrobe when she went to Paris, among many, many other things. And her work is in the National Museum of African American History and Culture at the Smithsonian. So I went into anthropology to study the clothing of the world, and ended up actually, at the Smithsonian. And the projects that directly relate to this program, to what we're talking today, first was the Will to Adorn, on African American dress and adornment. And part of that was a program called the Artisans of Style, which looked at the people who create clothing, who do hair. This is all textiles, and in relationship to the communities that they serve. And so the second part of this second project was called the Crafts of African Fashion. And we had done a program in 2018 where we featured textile artists from the African continent, as well as artists or designers who worked with textile artisans, Cynthia Sands, Brenda Winstead, and others. And finally, we're en route to do a presentation and meeting at Dakar, which is the Dakar Biennial in Senegal, when COVID hit. And at the same time, as a maker myself, I've been having a lot of conversations with other artists, about African-American artists, about some of the real needs that we saw in the field. And so we ended up being able to pivot. And I want to give Halle Butvin a shout out for her leadership in the cultural sustainability realm, and made it possible for us to pivot and to create the African American Crafts Initiative. So, but what I wanted to do is to start out with a video that came from the Folklife Festival of an artist, Brenda Winstead, Damali African Couture. And I think it shows how in our African American Crafts Initiative, as well as in the Crafts of African Fashion, how the global and the local come together.
I'm an adventurer. I see some fabric that I like, I'll go and I'll try to find the source. Just yesterday, my shipment came in from Nouakchott, Mauritania. It's a country that's north of Senegal. It's where I get my royal fabric. I swore these Senegalese women were changing clothes 3 times a day. And I was just like, well, what is this all about? I mean, and they just had on all these gorgeous things. And I looked at my stuff and I was like, oh, this is not going to do it. The very next year, I saw the mud cloth, the bogolan from Mali. And really, that was the start of me actually designing things, because I literally fell in love with this fabric. And even to this day, it's like my favorite fabric. I might visit, I would say, 75 different booths. I'm looking for a certain quality of fabric and certain colors, and so I have to spend quite a bit of time searching for it. It's called a slow movement. When I first went there was some fabric that I wanted, and I was told, oh, the women only do this when they have time. So myself, coming from my point of view, said, well, if I pay them, can they produce more? Missing the entire point. They do it because they love it, they enjoy it. When they finish the other chores, they do it. And it's something about this slow process and this enjoyment that makes the cloth beautiful for what it is. This is a new technique that they're doing now, where instead of stitching it by hand, they stitch it with on a sewing machine, and then it's hand dyed, and you can see the difference. It's a little bit more uniform, but still has an element of the like abstract. This is some of the work of the women that I was talking about. We have a co-op that are reinterpreting traditional designs. I think it's really, really so important to support these artists because it's a thing of beauty. And I feel that if we don't support it and show people that it's appreciated, it's just going to disappear because it won't have value. This is what's known as the batik of the Adire fabric, and I think it's the most amazing fabric. It's, again, master dyer from Nigeria, who actually is living in this country. There's beginning to be a real push in people in this country wanting something different and also recognizing and supporting the abundance of American craft that's in this country. A piece like this, which is all upholstery fabric, pretty much, and then just a little bit of the mud cloth in the yoke. That. One of the things I know for sure that people come to me is they look forward to having something that's a little bit different. We're in an age of, it's cookie cutter thing. You go to one store, one city, all the stores are basically the same. You don't really see a lot of variety. This is one of the shirt jackets that I do for men, combining linen and, again, vintage Ashkhen. It's been a really wonderful journey. I've met lots of wonderful people along the way that have touched and enriched my life. And I'm very thankful for it. Yes, I'm very thankful.
Okay. So I see some questions here, but I think we're going to go on and then we can come back to them a little later. So, because I definitely, the experience of the G's Ben quilters through the lens of Halle's analysis of promoting cultural sustainability in the craft economy, I think that that's a really relevant issue. And so thank you. I'm going to share one more thing on screen. Okay, here we are. So the African American Craft Initiative came out of conversations with fellow makers, and the idea was to create an initiative that would really support, especially during this time of triple pandemic, of COVID, of the intensification of systemic racism, and the health, the economic issues that have come out in the country right now. But also, we realized that there was an importance in terms of the function of networking between African American craftspeople, both with each other and with primary large organizations. Textile Society of America is one, but also the American Craft Council and others. And so we had both makers and textiles, and makers and stakeholders. So, in terms of the background and context, African Americans have obviously played a role as makers since the beginning of the American experiment, and primarily during slavery, skills and knowledge contributed much, blacksmithing, pottery, ceramics, even textile dyeing, indigo dyeing, and so on were really important to building this nation. what we found in these conversations, that the attention in terms of the nationwide crafts had been restricted. When people thought of African American crafts, people were thinking about basketry, quilting, Sea Island basketry, African American quilts like the Gee's Bend quilt, some blacksmithing and other heritage crafts. But this lack of understanding did really restrict the access to resources, and also restricted how people were seeing African American craft in the larger sense. And I actually include barbering and hairstyling as a textile craft, which it is. I mean, you're weaving the hair, you're felting hair in the African American community, you're cutting hair, and this is one of the most robust craft genres. So, as I said, belated recognition of the effects that I think we're all facing right now has created also trauma. And the first African American Crafts Conference, which brought people of African descent together for a long time, was in 1979. And that was actually the last presentation that where people doing textiles and other genres of art came together. There have been individual conferences, there have been gender-based programs like Black Girls Stitch and so on, but never a comprehensive conference. So we thought at Folklife that it would be really important to use our resources to help to rejuvenate and to recreate networks and to link people to each other and to get a needs assessment. So the African American Crafts Initiative, the purposes were to expand the visibility of African American craft artists and makers, highlighting the importance of their practices, but also to demonstrate the contribution of African American crafts, and of course to look at the how these crafts can be continued. Part of that continuation has to do with the economic viability. And it cannot only be about economic viability, because the richness and depth of African American cultural production is important to social and spiritual survival as well as economic survival. But we found that many of the voices of individual creators have been historically hidden. This is Vanilla Bean. Vanilla Bean is a milliner. At the time this photograph was taken, she was still working, and she was 98 years old. And she had a strong millinery practice in Washington, D.C., where she created hats for local churchgoers in the African American community, important people, important women, the National Council on Negro Women. She produced hats for Dorothy Hirsch, and but how many people know about her? So what our initiative, which has just started, has been about is improving increased documentation and research of African American makers and crafts. So the first thing we did was to create a database, and right now there are a growing database of African American makers, artists, and curators. We also compiled a research bibliography and filmography and webography, and we designed and distributed a survey to the people identified in the database to look at the interests of convening Makers Summit, which we did last week, actually. We hosted an online summit that discussed several of the issues that were really important to African-American makers, many of whom were textile artists. And some of the things that came out of it were some of the things that we had started to identify through the survey: the need for increased visibility, the need for markets and venues that were on the web as well as brick and mortar, and just as we were, as I was getting ready for this presentation, we actually received a note from one of the artists who couldn't make it because he'd lost his computer just at the time that this happened. So, and in this economic space that we're living in, these things are very difficult for craft artists. So we were able to get him in touch with SURF, which is the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, to start getting help for him to be able to do his work and to reconnect. So where we are now is that we're hoping to utilize all the information gathered from the research to create a series of programs, both public programs and such as digital story circles, more videos that bring attention to the work of African-American makers, like the Brenda Winstead video that you've just seen, and even a digital festival featuring African-American makers, and also really creating partnerships that lead to actual video markets within the United States. There had been in the past, we know that artists such as Brenda, and other artists within the African-American community sometimes linked up and did a circuit where they were hosted in members' homes, in customers' homes, and boutiques and so on, and would let people know where they were going to be, and they'd go from New York to Chicago to LA to all around the country in this sort of really homegrown and organic way of presenting their work, and their customers would come and meet them there. And this can't happen now. So it makes a lot of sense to create this kind of marketplace that it will go into the future and will hopefully expose more people to what they're doing. So that is a very short introduction. I hope we could get to more when we're having a conversation, but wanted to mention the team members who helped to put this together. Sloan Keller, our project coordinator, Ann Peterson, who did an incredible evaluation framework by which we'll be able to track this so it can be replicable. Cecilia Hale, who helped with strategic communications, and our incredible interns, curatorial assistants, Maya Lewis, Julia Hirsch, and Emma Efkeman, who worked with project management. So I'm going to stop sharing right now, and I hope we will have some time then to discuss and to answer questions. Thank you.
Diana, thank you. Thank you, Halle. Thank you, Ashkhen. I feel like each of your presentations are just a small glimpse into much deeper conversations that we all want to have and need to have moving forward within the craft economy. We're going to have a bit of time for Q&A, but I do want to kind of back up and just say that what I didn't say at the beginning is that we're, organizing this panel was because we all had a lot of questions about the craft economy moving into 2020, really trying to figure out what's happening and what are the role of organizations, individuals, curators, artisans, local communities. And so I really encourage you as you're thinking about, we have 35 minutes for Q&A. What are some of the questions that you have? Because although we're not going to be able to talk to you individually and create a discussion with you, we'd like to create a discussion amongst ourselves so that as we're all gauging these things, we can have a little bit of a deeper insight from everyone's experiences. I will say part of the reason that we all teamed up was that we wanted to look at the global to local. And I think, Diana, you said it right, is that we had in this panel discussion so far, the global meeting the local and many different levels. And so thank you again for each of those. I will say I definitely took notes and have been highlighting things. And I do want to just recognize again, that what Diana said that applies to each one of the work that we do is that the voices of the creators have been hidden and many, many, many times. And so as we kind of launch into Q&A, I still encourage you all to submit your questions. And I'll give you a minute or two to do that. Let's just respond to the chat real quick to make sure that everyone has the links that they would like. And so again, questions will go to the Q&A button. Links will go into the chat. So Diana, I think someone was asking about the availability to have the database that you're working on. Is that going to be something that you have a link to now or will?
Well, we will have a link to it. Right now, we're just compiling the information from the summits, and both the summits themselves and the links to the bibliographies and webographies will be, and database will be available. So stay tuned.
I just encourage everyone in the chat to go to our website. You can sign up for our newsletter for Folklife. And in addition to being able to alert you when that information is available, because we'll send out probably a press release to let everyone know that it's there, we also will be doing some programming and digital programming, as well as stories from our Folklife magazine on some of the makers that participated in the initiative. And those will be coming out over the coming months. So I would encourage you, for both the African American Craft Initiative, our work in Armenia, and other work that we do with makers, to follow Folklife if you don't already. We're at folklife.si.edu and Smithsonian Folklife on Facebook and Instagram.
Great.
Perfect. Thank you, Halle. Let's go ahead to the questions. This is from Sarah Kuhn. She asked, how do Halle and Diana understand the experience of Gee's-Bend quilters in the 20th century through the lens of Halle's current analysis of promoting cultural sustainability and the craft economy?
Give that 100% to Diana, because I am a newbie to American craft. I have heard of the quilters, but I focus almost entirely internationally, so I'm very new to understanding craft in my own country. Diana.
Well, the Gee's-Bend quilters obviously has been a really important phenomenon in terms of really the exhibition on Gee's-Bend was shown as an art exhibition in major museums and shown around the world. I saw it at the Corcoran. And it's really interesting because the Gee's-Bend is a small community, but the Gee's-Bend, the quilters who are masters of the African American improvisational quilt tradition, were actually part of a group called Freedom Quilters, which was set up from the civil rights movement on to provide economic viability to traditional African American quilters. Of course, this is a tradition that was both utilitarian and, we've come to see it was also a beautiful tradition that's been compared to jazz, that's been compared to a lot of other crafts. And there was a lot of controversy because after the Gee's-Bend exhibition, some of the people who were responsible for putting it together did things like Macy's had a contract with them to create sheets based on the Gee's Bend quilts. And so some of it was regarded as appropriation, some of the things that were done by designers afterwards. But then on the other hand, there were quilters who were able to make more quilts and use it as a source of economic viability. I think that there's still more room for work being done. And two of the quilters who were National Heritage Award winners were in our conversations that we had as part of the Makers Summit. So we're looking forward to seeing, how what the next steps will be in terms of working with our point of view and working with the ways that we can highlight the economic viability of their work. Okay.
I think we'll go on. Thank you. I think we'll go on to the next question. Of course, it gets us thinking that there's even a deeper conversation to be had about those fine lines between appropriation and recognition. Where is that line between where the craft is taken too far out of this cultural context to be, or its local context to be, beneficial to the local community. So again, I feel like I'm writing notes down for panels later on as we go. Again, this is from Heather Powers, and she said, this is for Diana. I can imagine that archives and education would have also been important results that came up in the summit and survey. Again, archives and education for that. How can those initiatives be brought into the new resources and partnerships you're bringing to the market? And can I just have that as an open question for Halle and Ashkhen as well? Because I do think that education, archives, documentation, and having that connected to the market is a really important question for all of us to have as resources and the development of resources. So I'll leave that for each of you to answer.
Can I ask Ashkhen, because to talk about that in the Armenia case, because one of the places that I visited when I was in Armenia was a school that catered to young people learning from traditional masters, and a really, really important model that I know that the whole initiative has been working with.
Actually, yes, the education plays a great role. How the artisan practices the tradition or how they transfer that to the new generation. In some regions, we saw that the established institutions, art institutions, play a great role where we have more artisans, for example, in Gyumri or in Dilijan. And in other places, the tradition is transferred from generation to generation in homes. Like, for example, the carpet weaving is transferred from grandmothers to mothers to girls, and etc. But in those places that have institutions, there are more artists rather than artisans. And of course, the bibliography or the research played a great role in our work, because we, as I mentioned, partnered with the Research Institute for Ethnography and Archaeology, and we dived into the research first. Like, we spent almost 1 year reading all these research materials or getting to know all these people, and we don't regret spending this much time just doing nothing activity-wise, but learning and learning about Armenia. I myself explored Armenia from very, very different perspective, being Armenian. So, and also another good example, as Diana mentioned, in every region you can find art or craft extra school, as you call it, places
school.
where, where the kids in the kindergarten or after the school go and learn different craft or art, and we have also different beneficiaries that run this kind of schools and these kind of places. One of them is in Lori, and one of our artists in Armenia also contributed to creating this type of schools, and they have branches in different regions. So that's that much. If I can elaborate more, just ask questions more.
Yeah. No, that is a real need, though. Both in terms of craft schools and mechanisms for younger people to know about the crafts and finding ways not only to learn the techniques and the materials, and sometimes gathering the materials, the environmental stuff as well, but also the business end. And in African American communities, one of the things we're hoping to be able to do is to, brainstorm more about how that can be augmented, as well as at a professional level.
Actually, I can say that in my generation, the craft making or art making was not so much popular. My generation wanted to become lawyers, economists, or business people. But I can see that nowadays the image has changed because a lot of people can earn money from their craft or whatever they learned from their grandmothers and didn't pay much attention or didn't look seriously at it. So I think the sector has changed also in Armenia. The people have started to look more seriously on the craft sector.
And also that there's a recognition for those careers, right? That there's an appreciation for the creative arts and the broader cultural economy that we're seeing in Armenia and in some of those communities in particular, like Gyumri as an example of young people that are coming of age that were born during or right after a really horrible earthquake there. And they learned craft in these schools, and now they're using this as an expression. And it's created a really unique feel in that particular place. And the connection they have between humor and art and how that's kind of creating place as well in Gyumri is really meaningful and recognized. And being recognized by people consuming it, right? Of consuming that culture and seeing that and seeing how that plays out. Right. The one thing I would add, Ashkhen and Diana too, for the African American Craft Initiative and some of the efforts that we're doing is this kind of connection that we're making between marketing materials and documentation. And this is also like going towards that same field of like really broadening and looking at the creative industries as a whole. And so we've received program resources to do this work, but looking at our work with artisans, not only are we supporting the artisans themselves, we're funding graphic designers, filmmakers. You saw that beautiful film about Sona. It's an incredible filmmaker, Nara Khudaverdyan, that's local. And, he has made, at this point, nearly 100, if not more, short documentaries about craft. And that's also changed his own practice and his own appreciation for heritage in the country. But what's really great is that we have the raw footage from that, and that will go into the Smithsonian archive. And we have a local archive project with the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography. So we have this really critical documentation of these practices and traditions. But then we also have this really beautiful finished short film that when the artisans want to market their products as an enterprise, they have a really great promotional piece that they're able to share that shows the process, the story, and the products. So it's kind of getting that two for thing, which sometimes it's hard to justify. There aren't as many, there's a lot of sources out there for economic growth, right? For development projects. There aren't as many for cultural heritage preservation.
Exactly.
We're kind of redirecting that economic growth money into also being, integral into cultural heritage preservation.
I think that's so smart, and it goes back into, like you said, the importance of documenting, the importance of giving voice, and us being able to understand it in the way that we consume information now, which is very visual. It's very much about video. It's very much about, access to the person making it. Let me jump back onto our Q&A. So thank you for that, everyone. Halle, this is for you and anyone else with this information. But when you say that craft is the second largest employer in the developing world, can you point to a place where, this is from Peggy Hart, where Peggy can read more about that? And does that include both the export and domestic market, or examples of that? Or just resources that you use particularly would be great.
Yeah, honestly, I am not a scholar, and I do not really publish. I have written one article, but so when I have done research in this space, I find that it's actually really difficult to find these kinds of statistics. Although now that the UK has really focused on creative industries, there's a huge amount of data about the size of those economies, but they often don't segment out craft. They like the stat I gave you about Asia and creative economy, that brings in film. So like even for India, I think that 45 to 48% might also include Bollywood, but it's hard to kind of parse that out. Mm-hmm. The stat of the second largest employer actually came from an Alliance for Artisan Enterprise, which is part of the Aspen Institute, a report that they put out, which I don't have in front of me right now. I was just kind of like Googling to try and find it for you. I'll keep looking while we're in the panel. And if I find it before we close, I'll send it out there. But it is in one of their reports on the global craft economy. And my small dog keeps growling and barking, so I apologize for that.
I think International Folk Art Market has research. So a lot of the cultural organizations will have a tab in their navigation bars a lot of times that if they do publish research, because I've been trying to hunt that information down. And it kind of goes into a conversation that, I know Halle and I had kind of starting out, which is, who are the organizations that are going to be kind of hosting and directing this information and leading it? We have so many different pockets across the world. It would be great to understand, and I'm so glad the Smithsonian does what it does to give us kind of a foundation to find this information to learn from. So let me go. Rachel Stewart has a question.
Google, I just found it. I'm going to drop it in.
Good.
Yeah, I cannot believe how good Google is.
Okay, Rachel is asking, could cultural sustainability also be an entry point for slow fashion and environmental sustainability? We're all nodding. Can empowering local artisans and crafters and inspiring consumers to buy handmade deter from fast fashion? And she says, thank you.
It's essential. It's a critical component of it. Would you agree, Diana and Ashkhen?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And actually, it's not only the making handmade products available, but also I think that there's a really great potential in terms of cultural tourism, because, as more people are actually wanting to learn how to create, I think that, there's always the fear, well, if people learn the techniques, are they going to take away from the traditional craftspeople? And what we've found, through years at the Folklife Festival is that, it takes years and years to become a master. And what exposing more people to, let's say, workshops, you go somewhere and you have a workshop by a master artisan. You're not going to become a master artisan and take over, but you are going to learn how difficult it is and, what it takes. And you're going to appreciate that a lot more. And so the next time you go to buy something, you're going to be able to know that, okay, this is worth what, this is worth the money I'm paying for it, because I know how much time and expertise it takes to make.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I can bring also my own example. As I mentioned, I am like a business profile person. And with this project, I myself started to appreciate the handmade and craft. And you can also market or promote the craft as not only environmentally friendly or slow fashion, but as unique thing, because no one craft product is exactly the same as the other one. So as a carrier of, for example, this jewelry, I know that no one else has this, and it will last for a longer time rather than the mass market one or the fast fashion one. And besides the project, also my mom inherited me this thinking that every time we went to a store when I wanted to buy a sweater, she said, I can knit it for you. So this is like a thinking that every person should have in their minds.
Yeah, and I think that it's I know that for me, I was exposed very, very early. My aunties and my grandparents would sit there and knit, or they always were doing handwork, and I don't know that younger people have had as much opportunity, but I think that there is a resurgence now. So there's actually an interesting gap, where you find that there's a revitalization, I know in the African American community, of people who are makers, and you find out that their grandparents, who are boomers, in the 70s when there was the last revitalization, like they're working now and exposing their kids to these crafts, and the millennial folks are now taking it up. So there's a website called Black Girls Craft, I believe it is, and somebody online will probably correct me with this, but they have 25,000 people, I think. I mean, it's a really great, big amount. Maybe it's 2,500, but it's 2,500 people who are members of that group. And these are people, in the age group is millennial for this, who are just learning and who are getting enthusiastic about it.
We have just a couple other things running in the chat. These are all really great points. I'm going to encourage, we still have about 10 minutes left if anyone wants to submit other questions, and just kind of general information going back and forth. So, check the chat again as we go. Phyllis, thank you for giving us there's not a link, but maybe we can look it up for the Kentucky Craft History and Education Association that are documenting craftspeople in Kentucky. So thank you, Phyllis, for that. So I think maybe we'll just kind of open up to you all, since we don't have any questions right now. Oh, wait, here we go.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, they're coming in. There we go. Yeah, Sarah. Hi, Sarah, by the way. Do you have any stories of textile makers turning to mask making during the pandemic?
Oh, boy. Yes, definitely. Actually,
it's part of American Craft Council as well. Is this the same Sarah? I'm just curious. And the reason I ask is because Diana and I just did a second series with American Craft Council with the American Craft Forum during the pandemic. And we were getting a little bit of complaints because all the stories we were talking about coping was literally textile makers pivoting to masks.
Yeah.
Like, can you talk about like how jewelry makers are responding to the pandemic? And we're like, well, everyone's making masks. Diana also did you did a really amazing local project too with mask making too, but it seems like I have examples from people in Tunisia. I think anyone involved in textiles,
Uganda, everyone that we're working
with.
All these artisans that we've worked with, if they are involved in textiles, they have been churning out masks left and right. A lot of them, some of them to sell.
A lot of it is out of necessity as well because of being able to have that market. I was talking with Global Mamas. They're based out of Accra, Ghana. And they switched. I think they're trying to make 20,000 masks, which is, it's an unheard of. But it also is not. It's going to keep several hundred women employed. So a lot of that is that necessity to switch because there's a market for the product.
I can elaborate more. As I mentioned, the textile art in Armenia was a resilient art. So. When the pandemic started, we did the masks. All of our textile artisans started making masks. But when the war broke, our artisans now are making like sleeping bags for the soldiers, or how do you call it? The jackets or any warm thing that the soldiers can wear. So every hard situation is making the textile artist to switch to to show the resilience towards the situation.
Mm-hmm. I saw Rosanna at Gore's, they're knitting socks, right?
Yes.
You say that, sorry, Halle.
I was just going to say, from historically, when we were presenting the tradition of crochet and knit during the Folklife Festival, what we were looking at is where a lot of this came from was during these really hard times in Armenia during the 90s, when there was really harsh winters, no power, and people were making sweaters and socks, and it was out of this need to build this resilience, and we're just seeing that something just fell over upstairs. Seeing this resilience and being able to respond to crisis like this, it just happens time and time again.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead. I think we all agree that's the brilliance of craft, the ability to pivot really fast. It's not having, you're not moving an entire operation. You can move usually, someone's individual household, what they're going to be doing with their own hands. Let's look at this question from Allison Hurrier. Are the organizations or collectives that these cultural heritage initiatives, are the organizations and collectives, these cultural heritage initiatives, that are considering the market around knowledge sharing in the form of workshop or residencies? Okay, so essentially, are we seeing more workshops and residencies, to your point of kind of education popping up with organizations or collectives?
Okay, I wanted to mention for
and compensation. That's another.
Yes, very important for the African American makers who we spoke to. That this was really an issue because a lot of the mainstream craft schools have not in the past had either a lot of instructors or attendees who were looking at African American crafts or being in attendance. And one of the things that came up at the summit was the need to develop independent. To develop new institutions that might do this. But the other thing is the explosion online of online courses really does present a great opportunity for things that are lucrative, as well as courses that are lucrative, as well as expose that are open to a lot of craftspeople. So I think that this is a really important thing and something that I know that we'll be following up. And I think that individual entrepreneurship as well as collective are starting to pay attention to this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting to see what's happening with access. I think just the ability now for artisans to take people around their studio on Zoom or WhatsApp. Suddenly you have complete access to seeing how things are made. And it kind of goes into, Rachel just has a great question here. As a millennial crocheter and quilter, I often encounter the problem that people expect my handmade goods to be a lot easier and cheaper to make than they actually are. How do your initiatives educate the potential market of handmade goods? Do you find that people don't understand the process of a handmade good when they attend festivals? And I think, and even let's talk about educating for that pricing strategies. How do you encourage artisans not to put pennies on their hours?
Exactly.
Big issue.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that we've done is, building on the Folklife Festival model, it's all about get out there and demonstrate as much as possible. And this kind of also is the filmmaking piece too, of documenting the process so that the consumer can understand what actually goes into this, that this is a handmade product, mm-hmm. and to actually give them that information, whether it's through, if you're selling online, having a photos of the process, description of the process, the film, kind of getting that out there. And we are trying to do that through our programs, but then also in person at festivals. Not what we're encouraging artisans to do is it's not, a lot of times the tendency is to set up a table of your product and then just sell.
Right.
And you talk to people, but if you can have someone help you with the selling aspect and then you basically work and talk to people about your work, it's transformational. It really, there's a different level of connection and different type of appreciation that can take place during that sort of exchange, where the commercial piece of it is a little bit separate and you have an opportunity to connect on the technique and what's involved in it. On a grand scale, it's really, really hard. We're, as humanity, addicted to cheap stuff. And, we just, I think all we can do is control our own behavior, right? So we have to kind of demonstrate that with the way that we consume and share that with others. But that's a really hard one. And it's really, and I also know what it's like having been a fair trade owner as well. And like, being able to afford the things is challenging for everyone. It's hard to say like, it's really difficult to say, oh, I'm selling you fair trade stuff, but I can't afford to buy other fair trade stuff. You know what I mean? Or ethically made things. It's always challenging, but I have seen that there are other models coming out and things that people are making that are a little bit more accessible. So that's the other piece I would recommend for makers is to look at, focus on your cost and price. Don't ever mark your work down, but try and make some things that are more accessible to people that maybe don't involve as much work for you and can offer someone that feel of what it is without it having to be the full piece. So then you have a range and someone who doesn't have as much resources would still be able to access your product and, purchase it.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And again, in terms of really when you're telling your story not only of, the time it takes, because, if you're an expert maker, a lot of times you're doing stuff that's based on years of experience. So it's going fast and people are like, oh, wow, well, this only took you 20 minutes to make, but it also may have taken you like 5 years of experience to get to the point where you can make it fast. And then I think that that's also important and part of it. So a lot of this is telling the story. And also the other thing that there's also a tendency, and especially in some of the development stuff, is to talk about, people talk about the harshness of the environment and how difficult, it is to work with it, which is a part of it. But I think that the emphasis on, you're buying the knowledge, you're buying the experience, you're buying the a lot more than just the item itself. That's really, really important. And I guess that's what I would focus on. And sometimes it's up to us as makers to tell that story. That's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I sometimes notice that artisans who compare themselves to the mass market go into this cognitive dissonance, and I sometimes advise our beneficiary artisans not to go there. Just know that your market is this much, and these are your these are your people, and concentrate on their needs, concentrate on this market. So because there will always be people who buy from the mass market and always be people who will buy from the handmade market. So don't go there.
That's perfect. And I think we'll have to end in about a minute or two, but would you all be okay to just maybe, since we're talking about the craft economy and cultural sustainability, and we just kind of had a great question about the economic part of it. Any last thoughts, just a sentence or two about cultural sustainability, maybe what you hope or what you want to see moving forward? I'll put you on the spot. Is that okay?
I'd like to see the shift in, we work in this sector and, cultural sustainability is not a widely used term. Cultural preservation is more of a widely used term. And what I really want people to see is craft is living and it's not static. It's not something that is, yes, you put objects in museums, but things continue to evolve. And I think that's a core of also of folk life is that it's always evolving and it's always changing, and respecting that and realizing that change is inevitable. But really, I hope that I feel encouraged by tech and what's going on in the world and people being able to exchange and share with each other. And so I hope that we can kind of pivot this conversation from an idea of cultural preservation to more future looking, the sustainability of like what it looks like moving into the future and staying inspired by that notion.
I'll go really fast again, and I'm going to talk to makers specifically. That it's so important to share. Again, I've said it, to share your stories, to consider taking on people who can learn from you, and not only and to network, and not only concentrate on the making, but passing on and letting people know about what you do. Very important.
Ashkhen, we have maybe 30 seconds. I don't know when they're closing our room.
I'll just say that despite all the hardships in the world, the craft and traditions will prosper and move on with the generations.
Well, I thank you all so much. Thank you for the great questions. And it's really exciting to know that there's so much interest in this and support of craft, and local craft and global craft.